Harriet Tubman, the revered 19th century abolitionist who was awarded a high military honor yesterday. Tubman, of course, is best known for guiding enslaved people to freedom after escaping from slavery herself. But get this, she also served in the Union Army during the Civil War. And in 1863, Harriet Tubman led a raid targeting Confederate forces and supplies along South Carolina's Combahee River. The attack destroyed millions of dollars worth of Confederate stockpiles and freed nearly 800 people enslaved on plantations along the river. So this makes Harriet Tubman the first known woman to oversee a U.S. military operation during wartime.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. Wow. On Veterans Day, more than 100 years after her death, Tubman was made a one-star general in the Maryland National Guard.
How about that?
Go Governor Wes Moore. Yeah. You never hear about her story in those terms.
That's right.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way.
And you know how we're always saying how history is not really history. It's not that ancient. Michelle Toussaint, my producer, found one interesting nugget. Harriet Tubman and Ronald Reagan lived together at the same, not together, they lived in the same era.
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman died in 1913. Ronald Reagan was born in 1911. So it's not that far back.
So apparently we reached the part of digital delusion where people are out here saying that Harriet Tubman wasn't real. And honestly, I should have known we were headed here, right? Because the moment you start telling the real truth about Black resistance, somebody always tries to rewrite the ending, but this time they picked the wrong one, all right? Let me make this real simple. Harriet Tubman was a real person. I think the problem is that a lot of them just can't fathom the idea that a disabled Black woman who couldn't read, lived with seizures, and was born into bondage still outsmarted the system multiple times over. So instead of sitting with that, y'all default to, oh, well, she must be a myth, because God forbid someone exists outside the mold that you've been spoon-fed. So let's run this back. She was born Araminta Ross in Maryland. Yeah, she was enslaved. She took a blow to the skull from her overseer that nearly killed her. And when she escaped in her 20s, she could have stayed gone. But she didn't. She went back again and again and walked more than 70 people to freedom. And no, she didn't float on vibes. She knew the signs, the land, the networks. She carried a gun. She told people, you'll be free or you'll be dead. Pick one. But wait, there's more. She worked with John Brown. She served as a Union spy and led the Combahee River Raid in 1863, freeing over 700 people in a single night. But sure, she's a myth, because clearly a Black woman doing the impossible must mean it didn't happen, right? Y'all will believe in talking snakes, cherry trees, and founding fathers who somehow love liberty while owning people. But you draw the line at Harriet Tubman. Make it make sense. So here's the real issue. Harriet didn't just escape. She turned around and made herself the nightmare of the slave-holding South. She was strategic, ruthless, and brilliant. But apparently y'all aren't ready for that version. So no, I'm not going to debate her existence. But what I will do is say this. If Harriet Tubman feels too real to be real, that says more about your imagination than it ever will about her. She lived, she freed, she wrecked the entire system with her own bare hands. And that's what you're trying to erase.
Day 6 of exposing Black history, because, like, it literally didn't even happen. We've all heard the legend of Harriet Tubman in school, right? The Moses of the Underground Railroad. She led hundreds and hundreds of slaves to their freedom. She's on stamps. Schools are named after her. Confederate monuments are taken down and replaced with statues of her. She may even replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. I mean, it's pretty cool, right? The problem is, it's all just, like, literally made up. At age 13, around 1834 or so, Araminta Ross, which is her birth name, was shopping in a general store in Maryland. An enslaved teen tried to escape, and the overseer threw a 2-pound iron weight at this guy, but it missed and smashed into the skull of young Araminta, and she almost died and suffered very severe head trauma from this. So for the rest of her life, she was dealing with very severe headaches, seizures. She would just black out randomly. How is it that someone with chronic blackouts can lead nighttime raids or guide groups through swamps? I mean, historical records show that she struggled with basic tasks. Okay, but maybe she just is that good. Maybe she's her. So what's the problem with the claims themselves? I'm so glad you asked. There are virtually no primary sources from her time to corroborate any of this. That whole, like, extravagant bounty that slaveholders supposedly put on her head, no evidence of that. Her 19 rescue trips freeing 300 slaves, it's like totally made up. Even if you just Google it right now, they're like, it's probably like 60. tops. Okay, so where did the myth come from? Well, there were two key writers involved in this. The first was Sarah H. Bradford, whose books on Tubman are, according to Chesson, pseudo-biographical narratives, and they have no standing as sources of historical information because Bradford cobbled together a bunch of uncorroborated stories, exaggerating all this stuff for drama and for sales. And Bradford later admitted to literally just relying on whatever Tubman said without any verification. And frankly, we cannot be relying on people with lifelong severe brain damage. Then there's Earl Conrad. He was born Earl Cohen, actually. And this guy was a Marxist journalist for the black newspaper Chicago Defender. And in the 1940s, he wrote quote-unquote history books on Tubman with zero primary sources, motivated purely by his dislike of white people. So, as a radical, he just twisted Tubman's story into propaganda for civil rights, ignoring her disabilities to create this kind of like invincible icon, this kind of like superhero figure. And by the way, that myth only exists to prop up narratives about black queens outsmarting and outrunning racist white people, and if she did it, well then you should too. You should resist systems of white supremacy by any means necessary. So the point of these stories is not history, it's just creating propaganda against America. Like, that's literally it. Truth matters. Also, I love black people.
The truth about Harriet Tubman, they never told you. Welcome back to the Freedom Room, where we uncover stories behind American history, freedom, and the people who dare to fight for it. Today, we are taking a closer look at the remarkable life of Harriet Tubman, a woman whose name is remembered in American history, but whose full story is often much less understood. Most people know that she escaped slavery and helped others reach freedom. But what happened after she became free? Why would a woman who had already escaped willingly return to a place where she could have been captured? And how did she go from an enslaved woman seeking freedom to a fearless figure who would later serve during the Civil War? Harriet Tubman's story is not simply about escaping slavery. It is about courage, sacrifice, family, and the belief that freedom means little if the people you love are still suffering. Stay with us, listen to the different opinions and perspectives, and after that, we'll come back for some important commentary here on the Freedom Room. Stay tuned and watch to the end.
John Brown and Harriet Tubman met for the first time in April of 1858 in St. Catharines on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. John Brown, awestruck at meeting Tubman, dubbed her General Tubman and referred to her as, quote, one of the best and bravest persons on the continent. Tubman felt she had already met John Brown in a dream. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in his biography of Tubman that she, quote, laid great stress on a dream which she had had just before she met Captain Brown in Canada. In her dream, she saw a serpent raise its head among the rocks, and as it did so, it became the head of an old man with a long white beard, gazing at her wishful-like. And then 2 other heads rose up beside him, younger than he. A great crowd of men rushed in and struck down the younger heads, and then the head of the old man, still looking at her so wishful. This dream she had again and could not interpret it, but when she met Captain Brown shortly after, behold, he was the very image of the head she had seen. Tubman assisted with raid planning by drawing on her geographical knowledge of clandestine activities and resources in the mid-Atlantic region, as well as recruiting formerly enslaved people in Canada to support the cause. Tubman fell ill and couldn't join Brown in the raid on Harper's Ferry. Tubman's recurring prophetic visions about John Brown seemed to prove true. John Brown's raid ultimately ended with all but 5 raiders captured or killed. A great crowd struck down Brown's sons, Oliver and Watson, who were killed in the raid and represented in Tubman's dreams as the 2 heads. Virginia came for the head of the bearded man in her dream, John Brown, putting him on trial for treason, murder, and inciting a slave rebellion. Brown was found guilty and executed 6 weeks later. General Tubman continued leading enslaved people to freedom as a conductor of the Underground Railroad, personally rescuing about 70 people in 13 trips and assisting many more to freedom. She was a spy for the Union Army and lived to see the end of slavery in the United States.
Sorry, y'all, but I gotta make a quick rant. Class, this is not a regular video, all right? This is a rant. I have to make this video because I have gotten the insult again, which I usually see happen to a lot of black Republicans, conservatives, and even some independents. The insult was that I would have been one of the black people that Harriet Tubman would have left behind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where you are wrong again. Harriet Tubman would have actually hated a lot of you black and white Democrats. Because Harriet Tubman was a Republican. And I'm not just saying that. She is historically a Republican. She just couldn't vote at her time. But she did it with her actions. See, many of you know her for freeing the slaves and being a conductor on the Underground Railroad. But many of you do not know her name was not even Harriet Tubman. She changed her name after she escaped the plantation that she was a slave for a Democratic slave owner. She grew a heavy resentment for Democrats. She grew a resentment so much that she volunteered for the Union Army. The Union Army was your Republicans. They were created, as well as the Republican Party, to put an end to the expansion of slavery that was happening by Democrats. Your Democrats were those Confederate soldiers. She volunteered for the Union Army, but she was actually so good that they just went ahead and recruited her. They recruited her to be a spy. Her real name was Arminta. And on the plantation, they called her Minty, and she hated it. So she went ahead and changed her name to Harriet Tubman. Harriet is a name that she took away from her mother. Tubman was the last name of her freed black husband. Not only was she a spy for the Union Army, she was actually the first woman in U.S. history to lead a raid, lead a military raid. She led these Republican men down to the South to destroy these Democratic plantations and free the people. So she did not like Democrats at all. Many of you know that she carried her firearm. She carried a firearm because she was a trained soldier. You know who took her on? The Republican Party, not the Democrats. The Democrats are the one that had her in bondage. She hated y'all. She carried that firearm, not just for people that was going to attempt to catch her. She also carried it just in case one of the people she tried to free started really wanting to go back to that plantation, and she feared that they would snitch on her. So she would use it on them as well. So Miss Arminta, better known as Harriet Tubman, was a hardcore Republican, a very conservative one as well. And see, the black people that were the minority, the ones that actually wanted to leave the plantation, I want you to think, black Republicans today are the minority. The majority that wanted to stay on the plantation in Harriet Tubman days is the same majority that wants to stay on the Democratic plantation today. So, you are the one that Harriet would have left behind. I'll see you guys on the next one.
This is Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Tubman had a problem. Now, her problem was a pretty big one. She was born enslaved. But her problem wasn't as big as his problem. This is Edward Brodus. Well, this is not Edward Brodus. This is Joe Alwyn, but he plays a character based on Edward Brodus in the movie. So, for this point, we're going to use him. Now, Edward's problem is that he was effing around and about to find out what happens when you enslave someone who's one of God's favorites. And let me tell you, this woman is absolutely one of God's favorites. See, even though Harriet Tubman was born enslaved, she knew this was not the life for her. She knew she was meant for bigger and better things. Now, Harriet Tubman was a woman of God, and she would often pray to be made free. She always said, I have right to two things, either death or liberty, and if I cannot have one, I will have the other. But the gag is, baby, she wasn't talking about her own death, and we're going to get into that real soon. Now, there's a thing called manumission. Manumission is when a slave owner frees their enslaved people. This is often based on them being a certain age, by the time they're 45 or 50, or in the event of their passing. And Harriet Tubman was promised manumission when Edward Brodus' father passed away, but Edward Brodus did not want to comply, and this was very common. So Harriet came up and was like, hey, I'm supposed to be free. We had this conversation. Your dad had a whole thing. What's good? And Brodus was like, yeah, about that. Nah. Harriet said, bet. So Harriet started praying every single night, every single hour, saying, God, please change his heart. Please change his heart. Please change his heart. But I guess God was out of office because the prayer was just not being answered. And then Harriet said, okay, maybe that's not your will. If you won't change his heart, stop it. If you're not going to change his heart, just stop it from beating. And God said, I fucks with that. The next day, Edward Brodus breathed his last breath. And then Harriet Tubman and her brother said, we are going to make a run for it. Now, they were on the run for a couple of days, and her brothers got scared, and they said, we're going to go back. We're going to go back. And Harriet's like, nah, I'm not about that. They said, no, we going back. So they all went back together, and because there was so much confusion on the plantation, they didn't even notice that 3 enslaved people had actually gotten away for a few days. That's when Harriet said, baby, when I run again, ain't nobody about to slow me down. So Harriet Tubman made a run for it by herself, and she made it all the way to freedom. Now, this is not the end of her story. This is just the beginning. She went on to do so many remarkable, amazing things. And let me know if you want me to come back and tell some more stories. In the meantime, I wrote a book. It's called Harriet Tubman Live in Concert. And if you want, you can click it right here on the link and get the book. It is a reimagining of Harriet Tubman. It's not a biography, but it's about her coming back to life right now and actually writing a hip-hop album. Yes, I am serious. If you want to click the link right there, you can get the book.
Harriet Tubman had been a white man. She'd be remembered as a prophet, as a spiritual guide, as someone who risked everything for their faith. The fact that she claimed that she had so many visions from God telling her when to go and when not to go and what direction to go is absolutely insane. She could not have known which way to go other than based off of people's memory. The fact that she never got caught and she never lost anyone, and just the symbol of what she did, like escaping slavery, but being willing to go back into it at the cost that you could be caught just to bring other people to freedom. I feel like that's like a deeper spiritual concept and idea that all of us can learn from. That legacy of like being freed and not just existing in the freedom and that physical space, but going back for people who may need you. That just like blows my mind, and that is like the kind of person I want to be. My sister and I always talk about how we are more interested in the Black Jesus, as in like the Jesus that enslaved people back in the day were able to hold on to for a sense of hope and meaning. And just obviously Black people to this day, the Jesus that they believe in, I'm more interested in than this oppressive white God that it seems evangelical Christians cling to. It's the perfect example. Like, you look at someone like Harriet Tubman, who believed in God and this higher power and chased after it, was hearing from God and took orders to free people. To Harriet Tubman, God was liberty. God was freedom. God was hope. God was the ability to be strong enough to go back for those who need you, to free more people. But you could also argue that the people who owned slaves and required them to pray to a picture of a white Jesus the second they got to America after being stolen from their land, you could argue that they are Christians too. They are people who believe in God, quote unquote, but that's not the Jesus that I'm interested in. It seems like both have always existed, these realities almost on top of each other. One being that people who believe that God is something that's controlling and allows you to have power over people. It's almost like this corrupt, evil force, most times viewed as a patriarchal figure that rules over people and encourages people to have power over others because apparently it was given to them by God. But then there's this other group of people that's existing at the same time who seem to find God as this sense of hope and this source of comfort and this source of liberation. Eventually they started to ban Exodus from the Bibles that enslaved people were reading. They would take out the whole book because it was a story of slaves being freed. Anyway, I just think if Harriet Tubman was a white man, she would be seen as like a hero of the faith. But because of the inherent racism and sexism of the average American Christian, that is not the case.
Harriet Tubman was born enslaved in Maryland around 1822. In 1849, she escaped and reached Philadelphia, but instead of leaving her past behind, she made the extraordinary decision to return and help others escape. The National Park Service recorded that she made numerous trips back to Maryland and helped around 70 people reach freedom. Think about that for a moment. She had finally reached freedom, yet she risked that freedom for others. Why would someone do that? Perhaps because to Harriet, freedom was never meant to belong to one person alone. Her courage went far beyond the undergrounds of railroads. During the Civil War, she worked as a nurse, scout, and intelligence operative, and she was involved in the 1863 Combahee River Raid, which helped liberate more than 750 enslaved people. Later, she continued supporting the fight for equality and women's suffrage. So when we hear the name Harriet Tubman, are we remembering the whole woman or only the part of her story that made it into our textbooks? What would you have done if you had finally escaped to freedom, knowing that going back would have put everything at risk? Share your thoughts in the comments and keep watching different opinions and perspectives, because when we return, we'll look at what Harriet Tubman's story truly means for Americans today. Stay tuned and watch to the end.
Harriet Tubman was interviewed. She said, "There was plenty of times I almost got caught. Plenty of times I ran into some dangerous situations. But whenever that happened, I would drop on my hands and knees and pray to God. And whenever I did that, my Lord, my God, my Creator would find a way for me out of no way." Queen Mother Harriet said, "There was times I thought they would have got me, but I was not afraid, because if the Lord would have let them take me, and if I would have been killed or lynched or worse, I would have accepted that as a message from my God that I had done my duty and it was time to come on home." And Queen Mother Harriet always took a gun with her. She always took a gun because there was a lot of Willie Lynch chip activated Negroes on the Underground Railroad. And she said every time a Negro tried to turn back because they was too scared to go forward. Woo! Every time a Negro wanted to turn back because they were too scared to go forward, I would cock my rifle and I would look them dead in the eye and I would say, "Dead Negroes tell no tales. You go on or you die right here." I'm going to say it again. Dead Negroes tell no tales. You go on or you die right here.
You can actually tour Harriet Tubman's property, and most people don't even know that it exists. I visited her land, and they walk you through the entire property that she owned. You can go inside the home that she built for the elderly, where she...
We hope you can now see why Harriet Tubman's story is much more than just a chapter in American textbooks. She escaped slavery, but she refused to believe that her own freedom was enough. She returned to help others, serve during the Civil War, help people gain their freedom, and continue fighting for equality long after slavery ended. Her life forces Americans to confront a powerful question: what does freedom really mean if it's not available to everyone? Harriet Tubman lived in a time when America's promise of freedom and the reality of slavery stood painfully on opposite sides of the same nation. Yet, she chose courage over fear and actions over silence. Her story reminds us that freedom is not just a word written in their founding document. It is something people have sacrificed to defend and expand. If this story touches you or made you see Harriet Tubman differently, subscribe to the Freedom Room, like this video, share it with others who value American history, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Because here at the Freedom Room, we don't just remember history, we ask what the lessons mean for Americans today. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.